Hello, and welcome to the Humanistic Counseling, a podcast in which we discuss, analyze, critique, and celebrate both well-established and cutting-edge ideas across the field of humanistic counseling. I'm Brett Wilkinson, Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Humanistic Counseling, otherwise known as JHC. I'd like to welcome Tyler Orr, a licensed professional counselor, EMDRIA-approved consultant, developer of Constructed Awareness, and president of the Constructed Awareness Institute. Tyler is a doctoral candidate at University of the Cumberlands and an adjunct counseling professor at Seton Hall University. His peer-reviewed publications include studies and conceptual articles introducing key elements of the Constructed Awareness model. He presents at national counseling conferences and continuing education events, and his therapeutic work emphasizes non-interference, as well as the power of awareness to support natural healing processes. So today we'll be discussing his 2025 JHC conceptual article entitled Constructed Awareness, Integrating the Theory of Constructed Emotion into Counseling Practice. Tyler, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This is exciting.
There are many ways that we can move through your article, but let's just start with a brief overview. What is constructed awareness and what inspired its development?
Great. So I'll give you my elevator spiel here.
Sure.
So constructed awareness is an emerging model of psychotherapy. It's relatively new. It first started in 2020. So it's a model that incorporates different theories and interventions that are unique to CA, but it also pulls in different approaches that are common in counseling. And one that's particularly interesting for today is it brings in humanistic principles. Also mindfulness, personality theory, and the theory of constructed emotion, which really is the topic for today.
Right.
As far as like how it was developed or inspired, really that came from my work as an EMDR therapist and trainer. So I was, trained probably 2015, then became certified, then became a consultant and a trainer, and did that for a couple years. So I don't know if you're not, are you familiar with EMDR?
I am.
You are? Okay. So in case the listener isn't, there's 8 phases to EMDR. So phases 1 and 2 are called history taking and preparation. And that's where you're, getting the history of the client, their trauma history, their life history, also information about like how they regulate themselves. And then that helps in phase 2, which is preparation, which focuses on developing resources for clients to do the reprocessing in phases 3 through 8. The phases 3 through 8 is the actual like eye movement part of EMDR, and that's what people know of as EMDR. And it's actually pretty straightforward for a therapist to do EMDR because like what the therapist does is they move their fingers and the client follows with their eyes. They'll do that for a set, for a minute or so. They call it a set. And then they'll stop and say, what are you noticing now? And whatever the client says, you say, notice that. And you do the finger waves again. And then you stop and say, what are you noticing now? Whatever they say, you say, go with that. And you do that over and over again. So within an EMDR session, I bet an EMDR therapist probably says, what are you noticing now? Maybe 100 times, right? Over the course of that session. So after doing like hundreds of EMDR sessions and thousands of sets of what are you noticing now, I started to notice patterns in how people answered that question. And it seemed like the pattern was they would respond to what are you noticing now in 3 distinct ways. So sometimes I would say, what are you noticing now? And clients would answer with all thoughts. It's like their minds were doing all the heavy lifting in the process. They would use logic and reason to try to like make sense of what's happening in the session. And I noticed like they sort of did that outside of session too. Like when they described their lives, it seemed like they were using their minds to regulate, to connect with people. So I first started to label, I guess you could say, those individuals as mentally oriented, meaning they relied on the mental part of their experience. And other times I would say, what are you noticing now? And it'd be a different sort of response. It'd be more of a somatic response, like the client's body's doing all the heavy lifting in the process. They would cry, they would emote. It was a very cathartic physical expression. And they seemed to also do that outside of session as well. So I began to identify those clients as sensation oriented. And then other clients seemed to be, when I'd say, what are you noticing now? They would answer sort of with responses that were outside of them. Like they would talk about anybody but themselves. They would focus on things in the room and use those things to regulate themselves, including me. Like a lot of clients would, like I could tell they were editing themselves to make sure that I was comfortable,
Mm-hmm.
almost like they were using me to regulate themselves. Like if I'm okay, they're okay. And I realized, well, that's what they do outside of session too. They use their environment and people in their environment to regulate themselves. So I guess what I was seeing was that people tended to rely on just one part to process an EMDR. And that usually showed up whenever the processing wasn't going very well. It's like they were just grinding through this one part and they not connecting to these other parts. So I thought, well, what if I go back to the drawing board, back to phases 1 and 2? So phase 1, history taking, use that opportunity to figure out how they're oriented, like which building block do they rely on the most. Because if I know that, like if I know which one's overdeveloped, I know which ones are underdeveloped.
Mm-hmm.
So then in phase 2, that gave me direction to be able to focus awareness based resources on bringing, like enhancing awareness of those underdeveloped parts
Mm-hmm.
to bring the awareness up. So like the person has access to all parts of themselves. And so the theory was like, will this enhance EMDR reprocessing if they can answer what are you noticing now from all parts, not just the one that they're really good at?
Mm-hmm.
And turns out it worked, right? Everybody, once I did that and people were accessing their fuller experience, the processing really took off in like more efficient, more productive kind of way of processing. So I was seeing a gap, a problem as an EMDR trainer, that a lot of questions were coming up in trainings about how do we do phases 1 and 2. Like no matter how much, like the last day, like the first time I ever taught a training by myself without like a like an assist, like a someone observing me. In day 6, there's 6-day trainings. The last 30 minutes of the training, somebody raised their hand and they said, "What's a resource?" And I realized I'd messed up really bad. Like they'd missed phase 2
Mm-hmm.
of EMDR. So I decided like from now on, I'm really going to teach phases 1 and 2. But no matter how much I did, there was just constant questions. So I started to think, well, maybe it's due to a lack of structure because there's so much structure in phases 3 through 8. It's literally like scripted. You're supposed to read it word for word,
Right.
but there's no structure around 1 and 2. So originally, constructed awareness was going to be an advanced training for EMDR that put a 3 building block, right? The building blocks of thought, sensations, and external senses, a 3 building block framework around phases 1 and 2. And but as I developed it, it turned into its own thing. Like I realized as it was unfolding, it wasn't EMDR anymore. It didn't fit the definition. It didn't fit the tenets. So in 2020, I decided to stop teaching EMDR and focus on teaching and developing and researching constructed awareness.
Okay. And so in the article, you explain how constructed awareness employs Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett's theory of constructed emotion. We're going to call that TCE. This is the bedrock, as you said earlier, of your work. Hers is a complex theory of affect, and we can't unravel the entirety of its components and implications in this episode. Maybe another time.
Yeah, I love that.
But it'll be helpful if you provide us with a brief overview of TCE and how it relates to constructed awareness.
Perfect. Yeah. So like you said, it was developed by Lisa Feldman Barrett. She It really was popularized in her book How Emotions Are Made, that was published in 2017. She had written some articles before that, but the book really like put it out there. So much so that I don't know if this is still the case, but I heard recently that she was or is within the top 5% of scientists cited in the world.
I believe that.
Yeah. So this theory has really taken off, and it's taken off in a lot of fields other than mental health, right? It's starting to, and I'm hoping that I can help with that. But it's really done a lot in like engineering, computer science, law enforcement. But I'm working on my dissertation. So recently, just a few months ago, I did a search for papers that are published on theory of constructed emotion and mental health. I found 7 papers, but they were all conceptual. And as far as like
Mm.
counseling literature, there was only one. Now there's 2. This paper, the paper that I published with you,
Mm-hmm.
that other paper was published in the Journal of Counseling Development, and it was sort of like a call to action paper. It's like, hey, here's this theory that's doing really well everywhere else. We should take a look at it So that was exciting to see that.
That was
Um,
given Joel Givens and I.
yep.
Yeah,
Oh, you're the Wilkinson that I've
I
cited
am.
so many times.
Yeah,
Oh
that's
my
good.
goodness.
That's Dr. Givens and myself. Yes.
Well, I never put that together.
Oh
I
yeah.
apologize. Yeah, good
No,
to
no
meet
worries.
you. I've known you for a while now.
Yeah,
Yeah, that paper was huge for me because, like, it's the first one that was published in counseling on this topic, and um, I've cited it a lot, right? So thank you
hmm,
very much. But as far as I know, constructed awareness is the first therapeutic model that has implemented this. You know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I just haven't heard of others, but as far as I know, CA is the first one. Um, so, in order to talk about the theory of constructed emotion, I think we need to go back to the classical view of emotion and talk about that for just a second because, like,
sure.
yeah. So, the classical view really started with Darwin in his back in was it I think it's 1870 something. His book, The Expression of the Emotions in Man and Animals, where he identified six basic emotions, and really like all, up until Barrett, almost all the theorizing and research that's been done on emotions came stemmed from this, and the big wigs over time, as far as the research in this field, are like Paul Ekman, Carol Izard, but they talked about emotions as these innate things that live inside of us. And it's really cool. Like if you read literature over the years in this classical theory, they like to use the word entity. Like they'll talk about emotions as entities that live inside of us that are
Hmm.
ready to spring forth whenever needed. And we see this illustrated perfectly with like the Inside Out movies,
Yes,
where the main characters are little entities that live inside of her that they take turns sort of coming to the front position whenever needed. So, Barrett comes along in 2017 and proposes a new idea that emotions aren't these innate things that live inside of us that are like solid, that are like wired into us, that they're actually constructed in the moment based on like smaller component parts.
hmm,
She doesn't directly, in anything that I've read, talk about specifically what those building materials are, but some of the things she talks about are like internal, external stimuli, um, memories from the past. She talks a lot about like cultural norms, how our cultural learning influences how we experience emotions, which is wild to talk about that in the paper. Like there's cultures that don't have words for things like sad or angry,
that's right.
right? That you can only understand emotions through your cultural lens, which I think if we had a longer episode, we could really go into depth about that because
We
it's
could do an entire episode just on
the
terms
culture.
from other
Yeah.
languages that capture nuanced emotions, particularly see in Japanese and German and
Yeah.
so forth.
Hmm.
Yeah,
The cultural construction of emotion.
right.
Um, but yeah, even the word emotion is pretty new. I mean, it was invented, I think, like in the 1700s, if I remember correctly. I mean, like,
Hmm.
so before that, the people would talk about like sentiments and that kind of thing. It's like, or even our complete and utter understanding of emotions were different just a
Yes,
few hundred years ago. Um, but I think that CA provides, hopefully, enhances the theory of constructed emotion, takes it a little further and simplifies it by providing a framework for what the building materials are. So that's where we talk about the three building blocks.
right.
So the building, yeah, everyone has a mental building block, which are your thoughts, sensation building block, the sensations you feel in your body, and your external building block. So what you perceive with your external senses. So for me, that just provides a framework, a structure for it that's not given in Barrett's theory. And I think that
Okay,
allows us to then implement it into counseling.
very good. And so you've highlighted these three areas. Think about them as mentalization, somatization, externalization, the mental, the somatic, the external. You also have three major principles associated with CA.
Mm-hmm.
The first principle is that awareness brings change. The second principle is that emotions are composed of those three fundamental building blocks. And the third principle is that most people naturally lean into the use of one of those building blocks. And you call this an orientation, and it's more expansive. You have a figure in the article that highlights the variations on the theme and particular, I won't say emotional outcomes per se,
Mhm.
but dispositional. We'd say dispositional
Yeah.
outcomes or things or dispositions that are associated with
Mhm.
those orientations. Why don't you just slow walk us through these principles and then draw in other elements around constructed awareness as you see fit to help us better understand CA?
Yeah, perfect. So that's actually my favorite way to describe constructed awareness is to go through its three principles. So let's do that. So the first principle is if you bring awareness to your experience, it changes your experience. And we see this with like how little kids behave differently if they're being watched versus if they're not. They're perfect angels if they're being watched. They're capable of ungodly things, right? If they're not. And so um, the simplest example is like how we tend to do things when we're alone that we wouldn't do in front of other people. So that simple act of awareness has the power to bring change. And this is true for our internal experience as well. The more aware we become of our thoughts and our sensations and the things that we do in the external world, our behaviors, the more likely we are to be able to change those. Because without the awareness, we sort of lose that opportunity to change because we're just operating like on autopilot, right? And so, um, like I'm convinced at this point that the only reason a bad habit repeats is a lack of awareness of everything that's going on in the pattern. So the more aware we become of these little things that lead a client from being okay to not okay, all those little things can become opportunities for the client to experience it differently and then have like uh, a sense of agency that they didn't have before because now they're conscious within that pattern that's usually happening unconsciously. So with CA, we don't put any energy. Like as a CA therapist, I don't put any energy into trying to change the client's experience. Like I'm committed to that. Like no energy. I put my energy into helping them deepen their awareness of their experience and then leaning on the awareness itself to bring about the change that they're looking for. And this is where humanism really comes in, especially with like Rogers, that unconditional positive regard. But for me, my my hero in the humanistic world is Ron Kurtz. Are you familiar with Ron Kurtz? He developed Hakomi method, which was then developed into sensory motor psychotherapy. But he talked a lot about violence and nonviolence in therapy. And he says in his book, Body Centered Psychotherapy, he says that if you simply assume you know what's best for somebody, you're practicing violently. And what he means is like if I'm the therapist and you're the client and I assume that I know what's best for you and I begin to impose that will onto you, that's a violent, oppressive act. But the kicker is he says that it's violent even if what I'm assuming for you is that you should feel better. And so this is really at the heart of CA. It's like we spend a lot of time in the trainings noticing our own personal awareness of how we might be, like our own discomfort of the client's discomfort might be causing us to interfere with their process. And oftentimes their process involves them feeling uncomfortable, right? So if the client is here to work on anxiety, it wouldn't really help them if I just kept doing stuff to try to make them feel not feel anxiety. It's like if they're here to work on anxiety, guess what we need a lot of? Anxiety. So um, Kurtz, the nonviolence and violence, the way that he talks about, I know it sounds kind of extreme, but there was something about that that really helped me to get it on a deeper level. And that's actually something that I'd like to maybe in future writing introduce into the humanistic literature, sort of a revival of Kurtz and how CA integrates that. But yeah, so I think for that, the type of awareness that we're looking for to unfold, there has to be that willingness for the therapist to just be with the client's experience and not interfere in any way. Is
Mhm.
that making sense?
It does. And this is why you said non interference as well as the power of awareness
Yeah.
to support healing. And it's, excuse me, akin to a Rogerian non directive approach, but because you're layering in you are layering in some degree of directing awareness to particular things.
Yeah.
And in that respect, that's similar to both Gindlin and Rogers, I'd say.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Very cool. So, what are we bringing awareness to? That brings us to the second principle. So, it says that the human experience is constructed by three building blocks. So, mental building block, sensation building block, external building block. And this is where the theory of constructed emotion comes in, right? And so we as CA therapists, this will sound weird. I'm just going to go ahead and make it weird, but I don't think that emotions are real, not in a real, tangible way. They're real conceptually, and this is what Barrett talks about in her book. Um, Although she does like to say that they are real, so maybe we disagree that way. But like we land on the same thing. They're only real conceptually. An emotion is just a word that describes the collection of the things that make it up, the building blocks. And
Mm-hmm.
our brains do this all the time. They'll take something that's made of a bunch of parts and they'll use a one word to describe it. They'll say like, you will say, I want spaghetti for dinner instead of I want boiled noodles, ground beef, tomato sauce, garlic onions. If we had to like name everything that made up something, it would just be a terrible existence if we did that all the time. So our brains will take stuff that's made of a bunch of parts and put one word. And culturally, we agree that that combination of things is spaghetti, right?
Sure.
And so spaghetti becomes real in that way. But so the example I gave in the paper is my favorite example to give is a storm. So within a storm, there's all these things you can experience with your senses and you can measure with instruments. You could see the lightning and hear the thunder and feel the wind and rain. But where is storm? If it was storming right now and I said, go find a storm, you'd realize pretty quickly, well, there is no storm. There is no entity called storm. Storm is
Okay.
just a word that describes the collection of the parts that make it up. And same is true, I think, for an emotion. Like you can experience something like fear. Let's say you see a snake. That's the external thing, the external building block.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that triggers you. What does it trigger? Thoughts and sensations. So maybe it triggers words like, oh my God, there's a snake, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you see a picture of a previous time you had an encounter with a snake in your mind. And then it triggers like sensations. So you feel like tension and heat in your body. So as the
Mm-hmm.
external plus the thought and the sensation come together, it creates fear. But where is fear?
Mm-hmm.
Like fear is just a word that describes the collection of what's happening within the building blocks. So that's what I meant earlier. It's like with CA, we don't work with emotions. We work with the parts that construct it because I think that's where a lot of people get mixed up when they want to work with them, work their emotions, but they don't know what they're working with.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of working with emotion, we deconstruct it into the three building blocks and practice bringing awareness to those, what's happening, because those are actually real, tangible things you can experience.
Right.
And the third principle takes that further and says um, that most people tend to rely more on one building block than they do the other two. And that's what we call orientation. That's what I was saying earlier. Like some people are mentally oriented, meaning they rely more on their mental building block. Some people are sensation oriented. Some people are externally oriented. And like I'm mentally oriented, I regulate myself through logic and reason, connect more intellectually. My wife's she's sensation oriented, so she's much more like her body runs the show in her life. She regulates herself through her feelings and like movement and expressing her with her body. My mom's externally oriented, so she regulates herself through taking care of other people and like organizing her space. She'll
Mm-hmm.
do this thing where she'll text me sometimes and she's like, "Are you okay?" And I never understood why. There's like no context, but now I know she's like, she's not feeling okay. So she reaches out to me to see if I'm okay. Because if I'm okay, then she can be okay. Right. So this is, like I said before, it's useful for therapy because if we know what's overdeveloped, it tells us what's underdeveloped, and then we can focus awareness resources on what's underdeveloped to bring up, enhance those building blocks so there's a more balanced, holistic way of experiencing life.
So, is this the goal of constructed awareness then? That elevating these so that they're working in some form of harmony or coordination, or that they're, I don't know what sort of language you'd like
Hmm.
to use to describe
Yeah,
that,
we usually call it in tune.
in tune.
Yeah,
So, it's an attunement or a tuning between these three parts. And this leads to things like reductions in health concerns or movements towards the fully functioning person of Rogers, more effective outcomes in general.
that's exactly
Yes?
right. Yeah,
Okay.
nailed it. Yeah, and so like with you can have an in tune awareness, which is like fluid. The person can connect with each building block in ways that are appropriate. If it's like mental is the most appropriate, they go to mental. If external is more appropriate, they go to external. It can also be dissonant, which we view as like fixed on one end. So it's like I tend to be more fixed mental, like I rely on that one building block most of the time. But on the other end of dissonant, there's like we call it fluctuating. So there's not really a home base. The building blocks are sort of changing in ways that aren't useful or appropriate to the situation that they find themselves in. I
Mhm.
compare it to it's like fixed is like wearing the same outfit to every occasion.
Right.
Fluctuating is like you have no control over how your outfit's changing, and then fluid is more like you can actually know what the appropriate outfit is for a situation. And so we're trying either way, no matter how the client's dissonant, we're trying to move toward more of that in tune, fluid way of being. So it gives us something to shoot for in therapy.
So, what implications and what critical ideas do you hope the listeners will take away from your work on constructed awareness?
Well, for me, that's a good question. I think awareness is enough. That's what I would say. I mean, that's the whole point of constructed awareness. It's like that we don't have to rely on willpower and determination. And the way that I was taught as a young counseling student was, more of the CBT. I think younger counselors tend to be drawn more to CBT because there's more like things to do, if that makes sense. It's like it feels more therapeutic because there's more like action steps or whatever. But I realized early on, it's like that didn't work for me and my clients. There's so many clients that would like I would do the treatment plan. I would identify the problem and create the goals, and then they come back the next session like almost in worse shape because they had the same problem, but now they're double whammied with thoughts of like, why wasn't I strong enough to follow through the plan?
Mhm.
So that's when I was like, okay, I can't. This isn't for me. So I started to explore these other things like mindfulness and humanism, and that's what really led me to this idea that like awareness itself is very powerful. As it's a very powerful catalyst for change. And I think it's enough. And then when we do therapy from a place where change is forced, I think it puts pressure on the client and the counselor. Like Kurtz talks about, if you use violence, you get resistance.
Mhm.
And I think that's so true. So as far as CA is concerned, like awareness is the key. The three building blocks provide a structure for that awareness. It helps us know like what to bring awareness to. But at the end of the day, for me, it's about the awareness, and these humanistic practices that I've learned are really like there's a necessary ingredient to bring about the type of awareness that we're looking for in CA.
Very good. And so, last question. You've touched on this a bit in what you just said, but go further. What do you think is particularly valuable about humanistic counseling?
Well, for me, it's more of a personal thing because it taught me how to observe, like monitor, be aware of myself and how that shows up. How like my discomfort of the client's discomfort might show up and prevent their natural process from unfolding, or prevent them from actually practicing the type of awareness that we're looking for. Because usually it's like if I try to change a client's experience, I'm only doing that because I'm not really their discomfort, it's my discomfort. Like if a client's like saying they feel great, I'm never going to do any let's do an exercise to change that. Like I've never said that,
Hmm.
right? So
Right.
um, a lot of stuff that I think that I'm afraid that a lot of stuff that therapists do in session are actually attempts to make themselves feel better rather than to make the client feel better. Um, and so I won't get into that because I don't want to sound like I'm attacking any particular way of doing therapy, but I'll just stop with that. So I think for me, like a combination of like mindfulness practice and humanistic principles has done so much for me to learn to just facilitate or to show up with the type of therapeutic presence that allows this sort of awareness to unfold.
Great. Did you have a workshop or something you wanted to plug?
Yeah, construct. Well, if you want to learn more, go to constructedawareness.com. Feel free to check that out. There's all kinds of information on there about CA. I kind of designed the website to be a resource because it's new and people don't tend to gravitate towards things they don't know. So the website is designed to help you get to know CA. So there's the published papers, there's blogs, there's CA podcast. There's information about trainings. There's the next level one training is coming up in January. So it happens in January and February. The trainings are 30 hours. There's 2 or 4 days. So we do 2 days 1 month, 2 days the next month. Um, and there's 3 levels of training and a certification process. So if this sounds interesting to you, you can go real deep with it if you want. So thanks for letting me share that.
Tyler Orr, it's been a pleasure talking with you today. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And many thanks to you, good listeners, for spending time with us here at the Humanistic Counselor Podcast. All JHC articles can be accessed through the Wiley Online Library. If you're a member of the Association for Humanistic Counseling, then you get free access to this article and many, many others through the American Counseling Association website at www.counseling.org. If you'd like to become a member of AHC, then we hope you'll visit our website at www.humanisticcounseling.org. Thank you, be well, and hope to see you here next time on the Humanistic Counselor Podcast.